Showtime.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to see you in person. Welcome to our large audience today on Zoom. We are so excited today that we are hosting Dr. Dilip Jeste. He is one of the foremost geriatric psychiatrists. There are not many of them. I'm looking at our own Craig Nelson. And I couldn't possibly describe his career, which has been all over the world. He has been chief of a branch of geriatrics at NIMH. He's also been chief for several years of geriatrics at the VA down in San Diego. So let me tell you about his beginnings. We're also so happy to have his wife here, who's a pediatric psychiatrist, and their daughter is a leader now in neurodevelopmental, I'm going to say psychiatry, but she somehow got a PhD instead of an MD. So, but the amazing family origins. So Dilip got his psychiatry training at KEM Hospital in Mumbai, India. And after they came to the United States, he completed his psychiatry residency at Cornell, neurology residency at George Washington University, then was chief of movement disorders and dementias at NIMH. And in 1986, he joined the UCSD Faculty of Medicine, where he has developed and funded the largest geropsychiatric program in clinical research. They're focusing on schizophrenia and psychosis in later life, and also is the pioneer of the field of positive psychiatry. We focus so much on illness and risk and the focus on strengths, assets, and really the positive qualities that grow with aging, like wisdom, are neglected. And he has illuminated them and just been a guiding light in both the field of psychiatry, severe mental illness, as well as thriving and living with chronic disease and how they can coexist. He was the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Psychiatry for 15 years and is currently the editor-in-chief at International Geriatrics. He retired a few years ago after 36 years at UCSD, and not surprisingly, he is busier than ever. He is a past president of an American Psychiatric Association, where he was the very first Asian American president of APA to ever preside. He's a member of National Academy of Medicine. Dilip has been very dedicated to, of course, mentoring and training, but also enlightening, educating the public. He's written 14 books, over 750 articles, and 160 book chapters. Is not surprisingly, one of the world's most cited authors among 0.5% of all researchers globally. He's won many awards. I can't go through the list, but I do want to point out one of his efforts to educate the public, which is his new book called Wiser: The Scientific Roots of Wisdom, Compassion, and What Makes Us Good. He is a fan of UCSF, has many long-term collaborators here. One is Owen Wolkowitz, who they work together on looking at telomeres in schizophrenia. And Owen has told me that you are the nicest, sweetest, most authentic collaborator he's ever had. So that means you beat me and everyone here. And that you are a guiding light in the field of successful aging and positive psychology, and a remarkable mentor and friend. So with that, we're so happy to hear you today and spend time with you. And I just want to mention to anyone who considers themselves a trainee, if you're not, and we're all learners, if you're not on Dilip's schedule today and you'd like to be, 12 o'clock, 5th floor, bring your own lunch. Thanks.
Good morning, and Thank you, Elisa, for a very kind introduction. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be at UCSF. For decades, I've considered UCSF to be one of the best universities in the world, and especially the psychiatry department. I really feel honored to have so many colleagues here that I've known and worked with, and they're really leaders in the field of psychiatry. So thank you for having me here. So I'm going to talk on positive psychiatry with a focus on wisdom, past, present, and future. Start with conflicts of interest. So I'm going to begin with a brief introduction. And then I want to talk about how things have been as related to wisdom and well-being in the past in the world across the lifespan. Then what is happening today, and where do we go, and what should we do? So starting with just what is well-being and health. Typically, when we talk about health, most people think about physical health. Now here, of course, we think about physical and mental health. But actually, health is much more than that. And there's a very nice report published by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine a couple of years ago on whole health. And they define whole health as physical, behavioral, spiritual, and socioeconomic well-being. And this is also important, as defined by individuals, families, and communities, not by the treating physicians or the system. So we often define, and I think that's one of the problems with medicine I see for the last several decades in the country, is that we often don't treat patients, we treat diagnosis. What we do is diagnose somebody with a condition and then find out what is the right treatment. We need to go beyond that. We are treating a person, and people have their strengths and limitations. So this definition of whole health, I really think is important to follow. So the question is, what is happening in the world today? It's not right now very pleasant circumstance. Today's society has a whole health crisis. I'm not talking about just the US, it's really the whole world. The world has become so much polarized, overstressed, angry, anxious, depressed, especially with loneliness. And I will talk about the loneliness pandemic that has been there for the last about 20 years or so. Social distancing, suicides, I'll show you the number of suicides that increased not only in the US, but in several other countries, and increased mortality. Average lifespan in the US fell before COVID. People don't know that. It fell before COVID during 2015, 16, 17 because of loneliness. And we need to be doing something for that. So how can we convert that into a happy and healthy world with greater individual and population level well-being? And as Elisa mentioned, so in 2012-13, I was the president of the APA, and my main job was to get the DSM-5 published. And people often think about DSM as the Bible of psychiatry. And I don't think it is the Bible of psychiatry. Psychiatry is much more than DSM. DSM includes 20% of people with diagnosable mental illnesses. 100% people have mental health. So our job should be really addressing the whole population and looking at not just the negative side, but also the positive side. So I made positive psychiatry the presidential theme and defined positive psychiatry as a science and practice of psychiatry that focuses on study and promotion of mental health and well-being through enhancement of positive psychosocial factors, including things like resilience, optimism. But today, I'm going to focus primarily on wisdom. So when I started doing some research on wisdom about 15 years ago, a number of people said, oh, wisdom, it's not a scientific construct, it's a fuzzy construct. And you can't really do research on something like that. So I just want to present how wisdom has been viewed in the humanity. So starting with our scriptures, almost all the scriptures from different religions talk about wisdom. One of the best papers actually is by Ackenbaum and Orwell on the book of Job. That is the book of wisdom in the Bible. And this article titled Becoming Wise, a Psychogerontological Interpretation of the Book of Job. And so I grew up in India. And in India, the Bhagavad Gita is like the Bible. And it's something you learn from time your childhood. And it's really a compendium of wisdom. And I thought it was really important to see how Gita define wisdom. So we did a mixed method, qualitative, quantitative study on defining the wisdom as it was described in the Gita. And again, if you look at the ancient history, it is not just the religions, even in philosophy and science. Socrates said wisdom is the highest virtue and key to happiness. And Plato said wisdom is the queen of sciences. And yet, the hardcore scientists ignored wisdom as anything major until about 1970s. That's when the Max Planck Institute in Berlin started the first beginning of the research on wisdom. So what we did was then to look at the definitions of wisdom from the ancient times to the modern times. So ancient times, as I said, we looked at the wisdom in the Gita and some other scriptures. The modern definition, as I said, the modern research started in the 1970s. Slowly, it has grown. And now there are a few thousand papers on wisdom in the peer-reviewed publications. And one would think that these would be very different. Yet, the basic definition of wisdom has really not changed. It is very similar, not identical. There are a few differences, but largely similar to how it was described hundreds of years BCE and how the scientists define it today. So characterizing wisdom, wisdom is a unique multi-component personality trait. So it's a trait like resilience, optimism, so on. It has multiple components, and we'll talk about those in a next slide. Importantly, it has a positive purpose. Wisdom enhances a person's well-being as well as the society's welfare. There are not too many traits like that which have influence not only on the individual, but on the community and the society as a whole. Actually, the humanity is called, the one species is called Homo sapiens. You know what is Homo sapiens? A wise person. So even from that time, they thought that wisdom was important to humanity. And this is something important. When you talk about wisdom, people often think about wisdom as intelligent. Somebody is so intelligent, smart, and wise. No, they are not same. Intelligence is not associated with well-being of the individual or the community. Some of the people with the highest IQ are very antisocial. The terrorists, like those who were involved in 9/11, mass murderers, they have high IQ. And a number of studies have shown that IQ is not correlated strongly with well-being. Wisdom is. And that is what makes wisdom really special and much more than intelligence. So wisdom is a multi-component trait, and the single most important component is pro-social behaviors, things that we do for others. And it includes two things, empathy and compassion. So empathy means sharing somebody's emotions. Compassion means acting on that and helping somebody else. That's a single most important component. Second is emotional regulation. Opposite of teenagers, whose emotions fluctuate minute to minute. But emotional regulation with some positivity. Then comes self-reflection, looking ourselves in the mirror from that perspective and looking at our strengths as well as our limitations. Accepting uncertainty and diversity. This is something I think we are lacking as a whole for the last 20, 25 years, where we have people who think in one direction or the other direction, and that's fine. People can have different perspectives. But what is happening today is that people who don't agree with our perspective, we hate them. They are our enemies. Why should that be the case? People with different perspectives can still be friends. We need them to be friends in order for both to grow. Decisiveness. That doesn't mean making quick decisions, not at all. Sometimes it takes time, but not being ambivalent for a long time. That is important. And last but not least, spirituality. So spirituality obviously is different from religiosity. You don't have to believe in specific God, but believe in some higher power, something like that. Higher power that is helpful to you. At least that's the belief. And that actually makes one feel good, even when things are going badly. So these are the components of wisdom that are included in the definition from the ancient scriptures to the modern scientific world. What is the neurobiology of wisdom? So how can we really look at neurobiology of wisdom? So one is, of course, there's a lot of literature on neurobiology of individual components of wisdom. For example, let's say empathy and compassion. There have been a number of brain imaging studies looking at what areas of the brain are stimulated when you see some compassionate picture, for example. So, and similarly, antisocial personality, which is the opposite of empathy and compassion, quite a bit about the biomarkers associated with antisocial personality. So we can get some idea about the wisdom by looking at the components and their biology. But that's not the best way. The best way is to look at experiments of nature. People who were wise, but then they had some brain damage or developed some brain disease and they became unwise. Where was the damage, right? That will tell us about where is the neurobiology of wisdom. And I'll show you examples actually of both of these. Regarding the person who went from being wise to unwise as a result of an injury, the best known person in the world is Phineas Gage. He lived in the 1840s, 50s, and early 60s. He was a construction worker in Vermont. Very nice person, young person, and people liked him, very compassionate, kind, helpful, etc. One day there was a big explosion and large iron rod went through his left eye. And luckily for him, the only thing that happened was that he became blind in the left eye. But he survived for another 12 years. His physical health was not affected much. Interestingly, his intelligence was not affected much either. The only thing that changed was his personality. This is his description of the injury by his personal physician, Dr. Harlow. He said that Phineas Gage was, as I said previously, a nice, helpful person, became fitful, irreverent, profane, impatient, obstinate, capricious, vacillating, devising, quickly abandoning his plans for future operations, childish, with animal passions of a strong man. His mind was so radically changed that his friends said that he was no longer the Gage that they knew. Where was the damage? They didn't do any autopsy at that time. So we are talking about 1861. Actually, even before that, 1850s. But his skull was preserved. And Dr. Damasio, who was a main neurologist at the University of Southern California, he published a very nice paper in Science in 1994. So he looked at his skull using the modern neuroimaging technology. And on that basis, he found that there was damage almost exclusively to the prefrontal cortex, both sides, but more on the left than on the right. And there have been about a dozen such cases reported since then. People who had brain injury and then they went from wise to unwise. And where was the damage? Again, consistently the similar region. And then there's a disease which is associated with this, and the disease is frontotemporal dementia. So onset is before age 60, unlike Alzheimer's. And it is not the memory loss, at least for a number of years. It is change in the personality. Poor social decision-making, disinhibition, impulsivity, sociopathy, and so on and so forth. Where is the damage? Prefrontal and anterior temporal lobe. So based on that, and some other studies, we thought that the primary brain regions involved in wisdom are prefrontal cortex and limbic striatum. And within the prefrontal cortex, it is anterior cingulate, ventromedial, dorsolateral, and insula. And ventral striatum and amygdala, especially in the limbic striatum. Anything you sort of define, you have to find out how you can measure it. So, and there have been some scales of wisdom. We developed a scale called San Diego Wisdom Scale. I worked with my younger, brilliant psychologist colleague, Michael Thomas, who is at University of Colorado now. And so we developed, so there's total 7 items. And so 7 components of wisdom. And we developed a scale with 4 items for each of them. So 28 items, and then an abbreviated version where only 1 item scale. Good to excellent psychometric properties, and it has already been translated into several languages. So what happens to well-being across the life period? So when you talk about well-being, it's physical and mental usually, right? So we did a study of 1,500 people from age 20 to 100. And we looked at physical well-being and mental well-being. So physical well-being, you see that in 20s and 30s, it is the best. That's a fountain of youth. And we all know that, 20s, 30s, that's really the best health. By the time we are 40s and start developing some arthritis, hypertension, after 60 it increases, and after 90, almost everybody has disability. What about mental well-being? It goes exactly in the opposite direction. The fountain of youth is also the fountain of depression, anxiety, distress. Why? I mean, if you think about that period in our own life, that was a period when we have to make a bunch of important decisions. Do we continue education? What education? Do we take up a job? Which job? Choosing a life partner? What area do we live in? And we often think that we do much worse than our peers do. And a lot of stress and anxiety that we are really making some big mistake. So what happens as we get older? Stress does not go down. Stress never goes down in life. But we know how to handle the stress better. Because based on past experience, we can handle stress. And so mental well-being continues to improve with age. And so this was a study done in San Diego. So does that really apply to other communities? So that's why I like this paper. This was published in Journal of Abnormal Psychology. So these researchers studied 611,000 people across different parts of the US and looked at the psychological distress from age 18 to 70. And what you find is very similar to what we reported. That is, in the 18, 20, 30s, there is the highest level of distress, and that goes down progressively. Again, the subjective distress goes down, objective stress doesn't. So, is that true for wisdom? And actually, we don't know exactly, because what we need to do that is really studies which follow people over a long period of time and then measure wisdom in a scientific way and control for other variables that hasn't always happened. But by and large, I would say wisdom components seem to be better in many older people than in younger adults. That word mean is important, because there are some young people who are very wise and some old people who are very unwise. But by and large, with aging, empathy, compassion, emotional regulation, spirituality, they tend to increase with aging. And what about well-being in seriously mentally ill people, like people with schizophrenia? We think that there would be no well-being in people with these illnesses. Not true. We found that a sizable minority of older people with illnesses like schizophrenia have well-being scores in the normal range. Their well-being correlates with their levels of resilience and several other positive traits, probably including wisdom. And remission of recovery of schizophrenia is not an oxymoron. When I went to medical school, I was taught that schizophrenia is like cancer of mind. That you never recover from that. Not true. I think probably all of you have seen the movie Beautiful Mind. It's a true story of a Nobel laureate, John Nash. He developed schizophrenia in his early 20s. 30 years he suffered a lot, got an ECT, insulin coma, what have you. Then he started getting better. Especially after the age of 50, he started getting better. At the age of 60, he wrote a research paper for the first time in 30 years. 66, he got the Nobel Prize, of course, for the work that he had done back then. And a few years later, he was a keynote speaker at the APA. Imagine a person with schizophrenia being a keynote speaker at the APA. Isn't that great? So those are the things. So if you look at the past and where we are, things have been really important for studying well-being as a whole. The modern times have been different. There's a beautiful book called Biography of Loneliness, written by a British historian, Albert Affey. She said that before 1800, the word loneliness did not exist in English language. The word that existed was oneliness. Now, it's not just a question of L being absent. It's really the two being different constructs. This is oneliness. So you're by yourself, but you're fine. You're happy because of your spirituality, religiosity, whatever it is, you're fine. This is loneliness, where there is distress associated with feeling alone. So that's the important thing to remember. Loneliness is not objectively defined. It's subjectively defined by distress, how distressed we feel. So why did the word change from oneliness to loneliness in 1800? This is again, where Albert is writing. She said that it was primarily because of the change of the society from agricultural to industrial society. In the agricultural society, there were small villages, small towns, and everybody worked together, large families, communities. As industrialization started, that changed progressively. Families became smaller, divorce rates increased. People started moving from one place to another. And what you do is important to you, not your family does or what other people in your group do. So the whole thing changed from a larger number of people to just one person. Again, this has been happening slowly over a period of time, but it has been much worse in the last 25 years. You probably have seen this book written by our former Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, called Loneliness Epidemic. He talked about, and the CDC actually has considerable data, and so has WHO, about how terrible loneliness has been in the last 25 years. 162,000 deaths per year in the US are attributable to loneliness, and the various diseases I will show you in the slides soon, more than the mortality caused by lung cancer or stroke. And it is not just a US thing. New ministries of loneliness were established in the UK and Japan because they said that loneliness, it's not just a health issue. It really affects the functioning of the whole society, businesses, government, and so on. So these are ministries of loneliness. And the World Health Organization, a couple of years ago, published a report, and they said loneliness is a global health crisis. It's a global health priority. Why is this happening in the last 25 years? Before that, what are the causes of mortality from loneliness? Heart disease, diabetes, obesity, major depression with suicide, opioid use, alcohol use, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementia. Now, how do we know actually that these diseases are associated with loneliness? Numerous studies, including tens of thousands of people across the world, have consistently shown, and by the way, not just cross-sectional studies, longitudinal studies have shown that people who are lonely at baseline, 5 to 7 years later, they're much more likely to develop one of these conditions. Now, why is that? Two reasons. One is similarity in the genes associated with loneliness as well as with these diseases. So number of genes are similar to the two. And the other reason is, of course, behavioral. If somebody is lonely, what would they do? They would sit in front of TV most of the day, drink beer, other wine, and so on, and eat some, etc., and not really have exercise. So that increases the risk, of course, of obesity, diabetes, and what have you. So for both these reasons, the risk goes up. The rates of suicide, they increased by 33% in 2 decades in the US. And again, as I said, it's not just the US. Number of other countries, they have gone up. So why? What is happening in the 21st century that is causing this loneliness pandemic? So the three main changes that have occurred actually in this century are globalization, which is great in many ways. You know, we can fly from one place to another place in no time. Super fast growth of technology, it's going so fast. And social media, right? I mean, you have thousands of friends across the world. So these are all good things. Well, they all have downsides. Globalization, for example, has increased competition so much. We are not competing just with people in our town, but they can come across the world, harder to get a job. Super fast growth of technology has been positive, but also has been stressful to many people. Social media have, you know, in many ways they are great, but so many ways they are not, especially for younger people, including teenagers. And so somebody called, actually, these are anti-social media because they are promoting really a bunch of different things, including things like suicide and drug use and so on and so forth. So these are the things that have really led to this loneliness pandemic. The good news is that there is an antidote or vaccine for loneliness, and that is wisdom, especially the compassion component of wisdom. So we have published several studies, but there are actually numerous studies now from other parts of the world too, reporting something similar. So we found actually a number of studies, which I've shown one there, the correlation between wisdom and loneliness, or between compassion and loneliness. The Pearson's R is -0.6. It varies from -0.5 to -0.75. So it's really strong, high effect size correlation. And even the longitudinal studies show that people who have higher scores on wisdom, compassion at baseline are much less likely to become lonely 5 to 7 years later. And it is not just a clinical finding, biological also. Published a paper on EEG and even gut microbiome. The more diverse the gut microbiome, the better it is for our health. Studies has shown that lonely people don't have diverse microbiome. Wiser and more compassionate people have. And again, it is bidirectionality in terms of microbiome and socialization. So clearly, things are going wrong in the world over the last 25 years. And we got to do something, especially as mental health professionals. It's really our job to help improve not only care of the person we see as a patient, but really society as a whole. And so our needs, how can we control and do something for this? So can we really do something? Is there any way that we can improve compassion? So we published a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials for enhancing wisdom components in Shama Psychiatry a few years ago. And we found there were 57, really wonderful to see that, 57 randomized controlled trials, mostly of the behavioral interventions that sought to enhance not wisdom as a whole, but component of wisdom. And the three most studied components were empathy and compassion, emotional regulation, and spirituality. Did these interventions work? 47% of these studies, so nearly half of the studies, showed significant increase in that component with moderate to large effect size. So there are ways in which we can improve compassion, emotional regulation, decisiveness, and so on and so forth, with various components of wisdom. We can increase those components, right? And there have been several studies, including this one nice study that was published just last year. Study came from Hong Kong. It's a 3-arm randomized controlled trial. So this was a study. It's also very interesting because it was the therapists were lay therapists, but they were trained. And they looked at 273 older adults with severe loneliness. And the intervention was not delivered in person, but by phone. And it was a 3-minute telephone for twice a week. They found that there's significant improvement in wisdom overall, followed by improvement in the empathy and compared to the control group. So what it means is that actually, yes, we can do something to improve components of wisdom in different ways. And again, there have been several such studies. I'm just showing one. So what can we do at an individual level? And what can we tell our patients, their family members, and our friends and colleagues too, especially younger people? So there is something called 3 good things. I think many of you probably know about that. If you Google, you'll find that out. People often talk about a gratitude diary, keeping a diary in which you write about why you feel grateful, something that happened in the last 24 hours. You're supposed to do that. And actually it worked well, except that after some time people got bored. Who is going to write every night? So this is replaced now with 3 good things. So what is 3 good things? When we go to bed, typically we only think about the things that bothered us in the last 48 hours, 24 hours, things that stressed us out, we didn't do well, whatever. That's actually the wrong thing to do. Think about 3 good things that happened to us in the last 24 hours. What is a good thing? When we help somebody, so we feel proud of ourselves that actually we were compassionate to other people, and also when others helped us. So we feel grateful to the people who were so compassionate to us, right? So if you think every night, then that really becomes a second nature. Next day, you got, what am I going to think end of the day? Again, and this is especially important for younger people who are doing nothing but thinking about the things that are going wrong. Think about actually the things that go right in that week, good things. So 3 good things. Another is meeting people who are different from us. Again, this is a part of increasing the diversity of perspectives. People who are different demographically, as well as in other ways, but also with different perspectives. As I said, the problem with today's world is it has become so polarized that anybody we don't agree with on certain perspective, he or she is bad, he's a villain, and then we don't want to. That's really not helpful. Then self-reflection, understand ourselves better. So suggest that you can, just like we go to the gym or walk in the evening for 50 minutes. Here we can say half hour every 3rd day for self-reflection, things that made us happy versus stressed out. Self-compassion. Compassion is not just to other people, but we have to be compassionate toward ourselves also. And mindfulness. This is actually, many of you know, so many studies of mindfulness that have been done that have shown biological effects of mindfulness. Changes in the biomarkers, and not just inflammatory biomarkers, but even changes on MRI, even structural changes because of mindfulness that has been practiced for a long time. So these are really good interventions, and they promote components of wisdom. So this is at the individual level. What about the community level? Is there something that can be done? People have done. There's a lot of literature of that. For example, there is something called age-friendly community. The World Health Organization started this movement a couple of decades ago. And they said that a community should decide that they're age-friendly, and then what do they do? So even the streets, crossing of the streets, ability to learn something new, to teach, etc. Otherwise, the world that we live in today, I think especially in the Western world, especially in the US, there is so much ageism. Older people are thought to be a burden on the society. And people often sometimes say, why are we wasting money on healthcare of older people? They're going to die soon. Let us save that money and use them for younger people. Well, the problem with that is that older people are very helpful for younger people too. And that's why I mentioned about these intergenerational activities. There are a number of studies, randomized controlled trials, that have shown that when older and younger people work together, for example, on this experience score funded by MacArthur Foundation, that older people over age 65 who are retired from their job, spending 15 hours a week in an elementary school. And just end of the day, you go there, spend an hour or so with the kids, and you help them, not only with reading, writing, but also what are stresses they have. They found after 2 years that the kids, of course, their grades went through the roof, they're very happy. Older people themselves, the volume of the hippocampus on MRI was larger in the people who completed this activity compared to those who did not. This does not mean that hippocampus grew. No, it didn't. It meant it didn't shrink the way it did in the control group. So intergenerational activities are helpful for both the generation. Compassionate community movement, something started in New Zealand, now it is coming Europe. And VA, there are a number of VAs now have a program called Compassionate Contact Core, where you call the person who is lonely and talk to him or her a couple of times a week, and they found actually that it worked. So how can we apply the individual and community level strategies to reduce loneliness and increase well-being in the general population across the globe? This is really something, it's our job and mental health professionals, right? Where are we with that? So who are we? In the sense, mental health workforce, of course, it includes more than psychiatrists, right? It includes psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health nurses, social workers. These are all included in mental. And how many people do we have to take care of? 8 billion people in the world. How many of us are there to take care of 8 billion people? 1 million? Okay. These are all numbers coming from the World Health Organization, by the way. They found out in the high-income countries, there were 45 mental health workforce practitioners for 100,000 people. Okay? And what about low-income countries? 1 per 100,000. So do we really think that we can do something individually? There is no way, right? The number of, this mental health workforce is not going to grow. We got to help, we get help from something else. And that is where I think AI will be of help. And again, it's nice to talk in San Francisco, which is probably the world capital of AI. But the problem with AI is it is artificial intelligence. As I said, intelligence is not associated with greater well-being. We need to think about something different. And AI has been progressing unimaginably faster in the 2020s, thanks to large language model. Who would have thought in 2020 that there would be something like ChatGPT, which is doing amazing work. Again, it is far from perfect, but it is doing things that were unimaginable, right? ChatGPT can write apparently a thesis for which it will get PhD. And so something is happening. And right now there's focus on generative AI, Gen AI, and they often say it is going to produce super intelligence. How nice. Well, except that super intelligence does not produce human well-being. So we are developing this AI, which is great, becoming very intelligent, but it really doesn't help. As I said, numerous studies have shown that intelligence is not associated with well-being. Clearly we need some basic intelligence, but not beyond. So what we need is artificial wisdom. So can we produce AI? Can we convert AI into artificial wisdom, which will improve human well-being if it is implemented properly? So we wrote a paper actually 5 years ago when I was working with, collaborating with IBM, among other things. But we talked about developing artificial wisdom. And honestly, I must say that when we produced it 5 years ago, it was more like a dream. Now, in the last 3-4 years, I don't think it is a dream anymore. the way the large language models are developed and grown, as I said, ChatGPT just being one example, and the way it is growing in 5 years, AI is far ahead, will be far ahead of what we can even imagine today. But let it not focus on intelligence. Let it focus on, things like empathy, compassion, regulating human emotions, feeling positive, learning from mistakes, self-reflection, diverse perspectives, and even the group, developing friendly, compassionate groups. Can AI do that? Well, right now it doesn't, because we haven't taught it. Can it? Yes, it can. Because, and although AI will not have consciousness, AI will not have emotions of their own, but it can detect emotions in people. And so artificial intelligence to artificial wisdom, development of artificial wisdom will be feasible with rapidly expanding large language models, but strong and sustained interprofessional collaboration and oversight are essential to maximize benefits while mitigating its risk. And the robots, artificial wisdom robots, will have to be supervised by wise and ethical human beings. But it is feasible. I really think so, that the way it is growing, it is doing things. There is something called, I'll finish very soon, so we'll have some time for question and answer. But there's something called theory of mind. So theory of mind means I can say what somebody else is thinking without even talking to that person about that. So can we really do that? Yes, if you know some person reasonably well and something new happens, and we expect how that person will react. Can a machine do that? People say, no, how can a machine without talking and getting data? So after the large language models came, there have been some randomized controlled trials. And they found that in the beginning, no machine could do that. Then the number increased to 25%, then 50%, then 75%. And I think it will increase, my guess is probably to 95%, not 100%, but where the machines can predict what you are thinking without actually directly asking you. Again, the issue is that machines are becoming stronger, and we just need to focus not on just a super intelligence, but wisdom. And this is my last slide. So I think what we need to do is we need to shift today's lonely, distressed, polarized world into happier, healthier, and wiser society. And there are not enough of us to do that ourselves. So we really need help. And that help can come from AI converting into AW. Let me stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
I've got a dozen questions for you. I'm glad we're going to meet after this. I guess one of the first ones, just going in order, was I was struck by the slide and your comment about spirituality, and wondering about, as you think about spirituality as a component of wisdom, is it an often associated feature, or is it an essential feature? Because if it's essential, it seems like a critique of existential psychotherapy, potentially a critique of the scientific community writ large that tends to be not focused on spirituality necessarily. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. So it seemed like the other pieces felt sort of intuitively more foundational, and that felt like maybe an oft associated but not essential feature.
No, great question. Actually, when we originally published the paper on definition of wisdom in 2013, spirituality was not one of them. But the way the literature has been growing, it is increasingly being used commonly as a part of wisdom. And spirituality itself, I don't think it is a necessary component of wisdom. No, somebody can be totally unspiritual and they can be wise. So no question about that. How spirituality helps is the belief that there is some higher power that will be helpful to us. That is a belief. But that's not, believe strongly in that. In a way, it's like religiosity. With religiosity, you have to believe in a specific God, depending on one's religion. Spirituality doesn't have to be like that. So it's just some higher spirit. Is it necessary? No, it is not necessary. There are some non-spiritual people. But actually, I was surprised that the former director of NIH, Francis Collins, he actually believed that there is a brain region for religiosity and not just spirituality also. And so it looks like there may be some biological basis for the belief in something higher. But again, it varies. So it is not necessarily there. But I was impressed actually with the biology side of that. And so that's why it is one of the things that are common but not essential.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and it's such an honor to have the giant of geriatric psychiatry. I have two questions, but maybe I'll start with just one. I tend to be a positive person, and I think many of us are. So the question is how to try to when we're working with patients or colleagues or other people, trying to instill those strategies for wisdom, like the 3 good things, self-compassion. How do we modulate that? How do we balance that with the fact that the landscape around us is pretty doomed in many ways? And I'll stop here and see if you have any advice where we don't appear too positive, too Pollyannish.
Again, great question and great comment. I agree in the sense it cannot be too extreme. It should not be that everything is positive and everything will be. No, I think that's the wrong thing to do. But at the same time, I think we do need to have positivity. In the sense, if you look at the history, I often give the example of what happened in 2040s, in the sense, so or 2043, when the World War II was going on, and everything was so bad. And Holocaust as well as loss of so many parts of the world, it looked like the world was going to end for most people because everything was losing. And yet what happened? In 2045, the United Nations was established, World Health Organization was established, they're still around. And we came out of that, which would have been unthinkable in 2044, right? So that is how I think that things are going bad, right? No question about that. They can improve. And for humanity's sake, they have to improve. For example, now we have nuclear weapons and somebody can destroy the whole world. Sure, can it possibly? Will it happen? Hopefully not. And we need to do something about that. But I really think what we need to do is really teaching people that things can improve. And that's where the experience comes into play. I want to give you another example. When COVID started, in the beginning, there were mostly deaths in nursing homes. They were the first reported. And it looked like all the older people, Now, and afterwards, it was thought that older people will do bad because they are higher risk. And younger people, actually, they're not socially isolated because they have iPhone and they have social media. So they don't, right? So the expectation was younger people will do very well compared to older people. You know what happened? There's a paper published in one of the JAMA journals. They found that anxiety, depression, and levels of stress were several times more common in people between 18 and 24 than people over 65. That's really, that's not very rational thinking. And yet it happened because older people had been through things like COVID. They had been through some depression, economic depression, or some war, or some crisis, and they got through that. And so COVID, this is another epidemic, and we'll go through that. Whereas younger people, they never had anything like that before. So the world ended for them. So that's an example of how, by giving examples like that, people can really learn from that and get better.
Thank you for such a fascinating talk. I was just wondering, in terms of steering AI towards like more of a framework of wisdom, what the current landscape looks like between like tech companies and like them consulting or reaching out to like psychiatrists or like grounding themselves in more ethical ways to advance AI.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
How to
that.
advance AI? What does the AI field look like in terms of its compassionate wisdom bots and chatbots?
What does the AI feel? So, no, right now, AI is not trained to do that. But I think, so by AI, I mean robots, right? So if you have robots, in Japan, many older people have robots, each person, and because they don't have that many younger people to help them. And these robots, then they get to know the person because they are with them constantly. And they can learn from that, just like ChatGPT does using the literature. Here, by knowing the person, you can identify their strengths, limitations, how they react to that. And once we can train through that, so what is needed is for the AI specialist to see how we can add these components of wisdom to what they can be taught.
Sorry. The concept of wisdom is really interesting to me because it seems like it's one of those things where you have to do everything in moderation. Like if I want to become the best basketball player, I jump the highest, but I don't want to be the necessarily most decisive or the most. Comments about that, because it seems like then it's hard to maximize that function. Like you can't be that. You have to like be moderate in all those things.
Again, great point, and I 100% agree with you. Now, so on the wisdom scale, the person who gets the highest score is not necessarily the best person. So you have to have moderation. In the sense, when we talk about compassion, we need to be kind to other people. I don't think we can be kind to mass murderer, something like that. And so I think we have to have some control over any of those things. Again, acceptance of diversity, it should not be extreme because then we won't have any opinion because we talk to everybody. So there is no question, but it should be more on that side than otherwise. So for example, one should not be 100% compassionate, or one should be 80% compassionate, something like that.
It also brings up the point that speediness and efficiency and achievement is not really correlated with wisdom, that you need reflection, contemplation, and to really be in, using your full mind potential. Friday, come to our session at the retreat. We're going to focus on contemplative strategies for career enhancement, creativity, etc. Okay, Philippe. Dilip, I would love you to bring together your severe mental illness work and your wellness and wisdom work by commenting on what we can do here in our mental health clinics, particularly, with enhancing these strategies. Wellness strategies seem light and they're not taken seriously and they're not really built into our treatments. Alan Kazan has been calling out for these as prevention to address the global crisis, home care, et cetera, health, self-care. So the Corey Keyes model, not many people in mental health are aware of it, but it is that you have lack of symptoms or all the way to severe mental illness. And that's one dimension. And then the other dimension is languishing to flourishing. And so do you really see that in your life and practice, that people can have mental illness and severe mental illness and still have well-being, meaning, purpose, relationships, intimacy, optimism, etc.?
Again, great question. Yeah. No, absolutely yes, actually. In the sense, not in everybody. So I mentioned, we found when we were studying older people with schizophrenia, and we found a third of them had the well-being scores in the normal range. And they also had resilience, optimism, so these other things in the range. 2/3 of them did not. However, that 1/3 can do a whole lot. And one of the reasons why actually more people don't have that is because that's not a part of the treatment. So we treatment, and that's actually my problem with the medicine as a whole. All that we focus on is treating disease. And so what is the treatment of schizophrenia? Antipsychotics and supportive therapy. That really is not the treatment for the person. We got to have some sessions and some example when people can get together have good relationship. The single most important determinant of health is positive social connection. And this is not based on philosophy, it is based on empirical data, including tens of thousands of people across the world. Positive social connection is the most important thing. For example, John Nash, why did he get better? He got divorced, but actually his ex-wife, she worked with him and they got remarried. His colleagues were very helpful to him. They wanted him to come back. That is what is needed. And that actually helped him recover. So what we need to do, psychiatry side, is go beyond the usual treatment and improve their self-image, well-being, and very importantly, positive social connections.
Beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful answer. Thank you so much. This is an amazing body of work. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This will be a well-watched video.